This is our 12th year of doing Connects, and a lot of people ask why we do it, and I know there's a lot of new people this year. So it was an idea conceived back, 2002, shortly after 9/11, partly on the basis that we saw logical debate shutting down, we saw media clamp down on, and we thought there are so many issues that we need to talk about. We tried, and what we've tried to do is bring in a lot of cases, the very best people that we can find on some of the most contentious issues that we face. And it's not to change opinion, it's simply to give another point of view, and so that we can make better decisions ourselves, and so that we can discuss them.
I get asked a lot, you've done all of these revelations, all of these articles and stories all around the world. What is the sort of single most significant or shocking one that you've been able to report? And it's a really hard question to answer. I really can't isolate or identify a single most important story, because to me the most significant revelation is that the goal of the NSA and its 4 allies, including here in Canada, their explicit goal is captured by their motto that appears over and over in all of the documents that you read, which is collect it all. Not collect some of it, or collect a lot of it, or collect the terrorist communications, collect it all. And that motto denotes what their actual institutional objective is, which is to turn the internet into a realm of complete and limitless surveillance. It is literally to develop the capacity to be able to collect and monitor and store and evaluate every single form of human communication that human beings have with one another in the digital age. Everything they do on the internet, everything that they say to one another electronically. Which is another way of saying that the goal of the NSA and its allies is the elimination of privacy in the digital age. What I find most consequential about that fact, and this is the thing that I remember reacting to most strongly the first time I sat there and read through this incredible archive that my source, Edward Snowden, had provided with me, the thing that is most stunning to me about that is not what a profound subversion of privacy that poses. Although, of course, it does pose a profound subversion of privacy. What actually is more stunning to me and more consequential to me than that is the profound subversion of democracy that poses. If you think about what the internet actually is, which is probably the single most important human innovation, certainly in our lifetimes, probably in the last century, arguably in millennia. And if you think about that and the promise of this innovation, which was to radically liberate and democratize how human beings organize themselves, how they were able to think. It was supposed to be a tool of emancipation and liberation. To take an invention like that and convert it into a realm of electronic, limitless surveillance, to essentially degrade it from what it had the promise to be, which is an incomparable tool of human liberalization and democratization, and turn it instead into an unprecedented tool of coercion and social control. Whatever else you think about that, there's no denying that that is a profoundly consequential decision to make, to have our governments turn the internet from what it could have been into what it has become. And what was so striking to me reading through these documents for the first time, and still 2 years later to this day when I think about it, is that this incredibly profoundly consequential decision was undertaken completely in the dark, in utter secrecy, without a shred of public discussion or debate. And all of that was done by governments that continuously hail themselves as being democratic. We love to call ourselves here in Canada, here in the United States, we love to call ourselves democracies. And that's because you're about to have an election where all of the citizens are going to go into a little voting booth and punch a hole next to whoever it is that you think should occupy a seat in parliament. And in the US, we do it a little differently. We're basically in a permanent state of election so that now it just looks exactly like your TV, even though we're like a year and a half away. But we too have our little elections, and we punch those little circles next to the names, and we decide which party is going to occupy which seats. And so we tell ourselves, well, we're a democracy. The people rule. But I think it's really worth asking the extent to which democracy is meaningful if we're utterly ignorant about the most consequential actions that the people in government are taking. Democracy means more than just casting ballots and choosing the people that you want to rule. It's a set of principles and a set of values that have to prevail in order for there to be a real democracy. And we're very good at applying that principle and that realization to our adversaries or places we like to demonize, like Chavez in Venezuela or Hamas in Gaza. We're not so good about subjecting our own societies to that inquiry. And I do think it's really important that we stop and ask ourselves, even though we've believed for years, and everyone tells us that we live in what we think of as a democracy, how meaningful is it if we're kept in the dark about the most important actions our government is undertaking? Isn't it really just a kind of ritualistic illusion that has been inculcated within us to believe that we exercise real control? When I traveled to Hong Kong in June of 2013 to meet Edward Snowden, I had no idea who it was I was going to see. I knew that he was somebody who claimed to have access to a vast trove of secret documents. He had shared with me a small number of them, which I demanded before I got on a plane, just to know that he was real, but I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know his gender, his age, his occupation, his place in the intelligence community. I knew nothing about him. I didn't know his name. And when I got to Hong Kong and I met him for the first time, the thing that shocked me the most, by far, was just how young he was. I mean, he was 29, but he looked at least 5 years younger. I mean, he looked like, the average kid that you see in a mall. And the more I sat down and talked to him, the more I realized that not only was he young, but he was utterly ordinary in every single way. He grew up in this lower middle class background. His father was in the Coast Guard for 30 years. He worked as this obscure employee of a large multinational corporation in pretty much anonymity. He had no privilege, no platform, no prestige, no power of any kind. And yet this totally ordinary person, through nothing more than an act of conscience and an act of conviction, changed the world. He literally changed the world. I mean, he radically altered how hundreds of millions of people on multiple continents think about a wide array of issues, from privacy and surveillance to government abuse of power to secrecy to journalism to internet freedom. And if you look at the most significant and abrupt social and political changes, you often find that they are catalyzed by totally ordinary people, whether it's Rosa Parks, this completely obscure, ordinary woman refusing to sit at the back of the bus and spawning a worldwide civil rights movement, or a Tunisian street vendor who sets himself on fire and sparks this democratic revolt against the world's most entrenched tyrannies. The lesson that I think can be drawn from that, and that I've drawn particularly from the work that I've done with Edward Snowden, is that any institution that's created and erected by human beings, no matter how powerful or invulnerable or entrenched they might seem, can be modified and changed or even torn down and destroyed by other human beings if this right will and courage of conviction is summoned. And I look at those things, and for me, that ought to be always the permanent antidote against that kind of defeatism, that we should never give ourselves the excuse that we're actually incapable of changing, because the power that we have within ourselves as individuals is always much, much greater than we like to believe.